Hello friends, it's Kristine Vicente with Queen City Stamp Art, and today we're going to be making a clean and simple card featuring a coloring technique that uses alcohol and ink pads combined with a paintbrush to get a really cool coloring effect. We're going to be using the Cottage Rose stamp set and one of the dies, so the Cottage Rose bundle. In fact, I'm going to take this die right off and save that by my die cutting machine. I also used this little leaf die to cut a couple of pieces of vellum just to add us some little accents to the card. So we're going to be using those products, and then we're going to be using a piece of shimmer white cardstock. Now this can be found in the annual Stampin' Up! Catalog on page 140 at the top. It's called Shimmery White Cardstock. You get 10 sheets for $10. And it's a good value because you're getting 8.5 by 11 sheets, and this cardstock has a really pretty little like shimmer to it, but it's also great for watercoloring and doing this alcohol technique. It's a little sturdier than our regular basic white thick, and a little bit sturdier than our basic white in general, but it has a very nice finish to it, and like I said, a little bit of a sparkle, which is kind of fun. So we're going to be using that today. We're going to be stamping with Memento black ink the outline of our image, so I'm going to ink that up, and we're going to be die cutting this, so I'm just going to stamp it down on here so that it fits. And then we're also going to be using a couple of ink pads as a color palette. So we're using Blushing Bride, So Saffron, and Pear Pizzazz. Those will be the colors we use. We're going to be using 99% isopropyl alcohol to do the painting part of this. I like to use alcohol in place of water because it evaporates so quickly that you don't get the same kind of pilling of the paper a lot of times that you will get with water if you're not using watercolor paper. I'm coloring very lightly with this. I'm not using a lot of moisture, so this paper will hold up very nicely under those circumstances. And the alcohol blends really nicely with the ink as well. So I'm just going to pour a little bit in here. Now, of course, you can always use our water painters. I only have one set, and mine do have water in them. So in the water painter set, you get 3 brushes for $12. You get a fine tip, a thicker, like more medium tip, and then the last brush is a very wide, bold tip, like for doing washes and backgrounds and things like that. My brushes already have water in them, and I want to keep them as water brushes, so I'm not going to put alcohol in them, but you could certainly designate one of your water brushes as an alcohol version if you wanted to do that. I'm just going to use a regular paintbrush, a number 6 round today to do my watercoloring or my alcohol coloring. So I stamped, as you notice, with a Memento black ink pad. As with our alcohol markers, our blends markers, you're going to want to use the Memento black. It's a dye-based ink, but it has some property in it that allows it to keep its integrity when alcohol is applied. So because I'm going to be painting with this, if I had used water, this ink would run because it's a water-based ink, so the outline would get a little bit fuzzy or feathered. But because I'm using alcohol, it probably won't do that. I'm going to be very careful where I place my brush so that it doesn't feather. And you'll see in the I'll show you here on the example that I created. So if you can see this card, this one has a you can see how fine the line and details are, and they keep their integrity. They don't feather out because of the alcohol ink. So let's start with the green. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to give the ink pad a good squeeze, and this will transfer ink to the top of the lid. And so we're going to use this lid as the palette. So I'm going to start by coloring in the leaves. I'm going to moisten my brush, and I'm going to add some alcohol here to the actual ink. And this is perfectly fine. It is not harmful at all to the ink pad itself because it will be dried up by the time we close the ink pad, so it won't drip onto the pad itself. And then I'm just going to use my brush to move the color around. And I'm just going to color in these leaves. And what you want to remember about any kind of painting or coloring, the first place you put your brush or your medium down is going to be the darkest. So if you have a preference about the shading, then you're going to want to be careful about where you put your brush first and then kind of pull the color around. So when I start if I start near the vein of the leaf, that's where it's going to be the darkest, and then I'm able to bring the color out from there, and it can give a really nice shaded effect, which is what you often see when you watercolor things. And then when your brush gets a little bit drier, you can add a little bit more alcohol. This does evaporate pretty quickly. You just want to be able to move the color. So if you notice that you're having trouble moving the color, just add a drop more of the alcohol and it should move around pretty nicely. This is a very quick image to color. It really doesn't take any time at all. And I may go back and add a bit more once this is all dry. So now I'm just going to clean off my brush by swishing it in the alcohol and kind of dabbing it off. I can also tap it off, like brush it off on my my base layer here, my placemat. And now we're going to move on to the yellow. So I'm going to squeeze my ink pad. Now I have some yellow ink on the lid here. And the yellow is it's a small, very small area of yellow. It's just going to be on the center of the flower for now. And I'm going to leave it open because I'm going to add in a little bit of yellow to the pink as well. I like to add a little bit of yellow inside toward the center of the flower, kind of coming out from the center. And this will give a little bit of a glow to the flower. Just those inner petals. I'm not going to do it to all of them, just the ones closest to the center here. And I'm going to leave it open because I might add a little bit more. And now in the meantime, we're going to clean off the brush a bit. And then I'm going to use the pink. So I've got Blushing Bride here. And now I'm going to add some alcohol to this to get it moving around. And now I'm going to start adding some color. And like I said, I'm going to try and add some where I want the darkest color to be. I try to stick along the shading and then kind of pull it out from there. So here I can kind of overlap the yellow and it gives it almost an orangey look. But in nature, that's oftentimes what you see. You see kind of blended color, not just one solid color. So it gives these flowers a little bit more of a natural look, I think. And I'm just quickly moving the color around. One of the nice things also about using alcohol is that you get a very smooth coloring. Very similar to the blends markers, how they color in very smoothly. There's a very smooth color to the alcohol ink versus watercolor. And honestly, both are nice. This is not a slam on watercolor at all because I absolutely love it and I love doing it. But I think sometimes painting with watercolor can be wonderful too. I mean, painting with alcohol can be wonderful too. And when your brush gets a little bit dry, all you have to do is just wet it and add a little bit more color and it smooths right out. I really highly recommend this technique. And again, I'm using 99% alcohol. And I got this at, I think I got it at Walmart years ago, but you can definitely get it online if you don't have a discount store nearby. And it's a great technique. There we go. And now I'm just going to pick up a little bit more yellow and add a bit more to the center leaves here. Petals, I mean. And I'll show you what this looks like. I'll bring it up a little bit closer to the camera so you can kind of see how it looks. And then I think I'll close this pink one now and the yellow, and I'll go back to the green. And I think I'll add a little bit more green now that this is dried. So because I'm using alcohol, it also dries very quickly, which is wonderful because in a way that watercolor sometimes doesn't, you have to kind of wait for it. This really doesn't require a lot of waiting, so you can kind of finish whatever your project is without having to come back later if you just give it a minute. I'm just going to add a little bit darker in places where I think there would be more of a shadow. don't get too fussy with it, but it's kind of fun to just kind of look at each leaf individually and give it a bit of dimension. Yeah, I like that. I think that looks good. So there we go. So now I'm just going to clean my brush by swishing it around in the alcohol. And then I'm just going to dab it off, and this will just evaporate completely. And I will pour that out later. And right now, I'm just going to close up these ink pads, get them out of the way. And now I'm going to bring in my die cutting machine. And we're going to die cut this out. So I'm using my little mini die cutting machine. And this is one of the dies that comes with the bundle. And I'm just going to layer that over the flower and then lay this plate on. Oops, it slid a little bit. Normally I use, like when I'm over at my normal workstation, I use a bit of washi or a post-it note to hold it in place. Just going to run it through here. Sorry about the camera shake. Okay, great. And we have a perfectly die cut piece to add to our card. So now I will pull in the rest of the pieces and we'll finish up this card. So we're going to be using Memento Black on the sentiment as well. And I chose the happy birthday sentiment from the stamp set just because it's, I always need birthday cards. And now that that's all set, we'll get this out of the way. And now we'll just finish putting the card together. So I took a piece of basic white cardstock, and I die cut a couple of little vellum leaves, and I was going to show you this a little more closely. So this is what the flower looks like. Hopefully you can see this, some of the detail and how it's kind of yellow in there. For a closer look at this card, you can always visit Queen City Stamp Art and click on the projects, queencitystampart.com, and click on the projects tab, and it'll bring you to a post about this card. There's a link to the video there, but there's also a close-up photo, so you can kind of see how this will look. So what I'm going to do is just fold this base card in half. Just like that. And then I have a layer of paper, of Designer Series paper from the Tea Boutique suite. The 6x6 papers in that have a beautiful petal pink pattern on one of the neutral sides of the cardstock or Designer Series paper, and I cut that to measure the card front size, 4 1/4 by 5 1/2, and I'm just going to layer this onto the card front. Sometimes using liquid adhesive instead of tape runner can be a little bit more user-friendly. There we go. And now I'm going to add this layer. So let me just snip the edge of this at an angle like that. And then I'm going to set this down on the card. I don't need quite this much, so I'm going to snip this off. And I'm going to add this to the card like this. Just like that. And then I'm going to use dimensional adhesive to pop this layer up. So I just have some of these little miniature ones. You can use full-size ones, but I only have the minis right now in my stash. And you just need a few. There we go. And now I'm going to just layer this piece on. Just like that. And then we're going to add these little vellum flowers. Oh, you know what? I don't want this. I don't want the sentiment to show on the other side. So I'm just going to pick this up and trim a little bit more off the sentiment. And then I'm going to tuck this back under here. There we go, just like that. Now it's not peeking out here. And then I'm just going to add, I'm going to bring my silicone mat back in, and I'm going to add a little bit of tape runner to the back of these little vellum pieces. And by using the silicone mat, the adhesive will stay on the mat and it will not get on my project. And now I'm just going to kind of tuck these in, and they create a very subtle texture that kind of adds to the design without being overwhelming. And then to finish this card, I thought I would add some of these beautiful little iridescent pearls. So these are really pretty. They're a little bit different than the regular pearls because they do have an iridescence to them. So they pick up the color in a way that a regular pearl doesn't. So you can kind of see pink and yellow and green tones in the pearls when you use them. So I'm going to add, there's two sizes. There's a large and a small. So I'm going to add one of each here. And then I'll add another little one down in this corner over here, just to kind of tie it together. And that's it for today. That's the card for today. So again, we used the Cottage Rose Bundle from Stampin' Up. This is one of the brand new sets and a brand new suite of product in the new annual Stampin' Up catalog for 2022-23. And if you have any need for shopping, you can certainly visit my website here. My Stampin' Up website is listed here, and the June host code is also listed, so you can jot that down. Thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you next week.